A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hello, Herman and Corin. We did an intriguing episode yesterday. It's one of the episodes I really enjoyed listening to in recent days and weeks regarding my oft affirmed contention that what passes for news is often something that is a little bit more like theatrics, or what the type of information that governments want to put out. And I mentioned that it's a theory that I feel like risks being branded as conspiracy theory thinking. My theory is not necessarily that it's all fake news and disinformation and hoax and there's some kind of a grand cabal running the media in the world. It's simply that if we look at geopolitics and military affairs, that nobody is going to be playing their cards neither to each other nor to the media. And I mentioned that my belief in this principle has been born out from the division, as you put it very well, of this gaping chasm between the reality we live with and what we hear talking about, because we saw it in the lead up to this war, diplomacy and handshakes and the Omanis, and then the next day we were sitting in a bomb shelter. So when we hear about Donald Trump, negotiating with this and getting this kind of a gift back for Hormuz, I do kind of just think this isn't really what's going on. This is just like a Netflix version of what's actually happening. And as you say, it is kind of very unsatisfying because you do, especially if you're affected by the conflict, you want truth. And I mentioned that I ended up taking refuge in reading reports from think tanks, the Institute for the Study of War, and a random group of satellite imaging people, usually associated with these think tanks, who were posting military battle analysis. Definitely some open source intelligence amateurs in that mix, but not entirely comprised of that. And often just finding it's a more fertile, or it's a higher signal to noise ratio than the news, or at least it's more direct. But Herman mentioned an intriguing thing, that it's not necessarily that you want to discount the value of the news entirely so much as that you might want to view it with a greater degree of skepticism, or view it maybe as this is the official narrative. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is false, but viewing it from that skeptical lens. And that I thought was a very interesting way of putting it, because you don't have to be so binary and say, no, the news is all fake, I'm going to just read these guys. It's looking at it just as an input and not necessarily validating it because it's the news. And what I'd love to talk about in this episode, to kind of carry on the conversation, is regarding how we can access the news. So for many years, I never really was a daily newspaper consumer. So I have a morning habit, and now probably a afternoon and evening habit as well, of checking Google News. And that's kind of how I get my normative news consumption. And there are some sources that I like, but it does certainly have a pretty specific group of publications. Thanks to some updates that Google News have pushed out, publications can now encourage you to add them as a preferred source, and that will therefore, you'll see them more in that sort of search makeup that you get. But it's still, to my mind at least, a fairly narrow selection in terms of the outlets. Now, what I'm asking Herman and Corin is if you've any thoughts or for platforms that actually try to widen out the surface of perspectives and news sources. I've mentioned InnoReader, INNO reader, because this voice message gets transcribed before you see it. And it's a great RSS reader tool, but it's a lot of work to set up your kind of feeds and all that. I'm just wondering if there's any other aggregators besides Google News, which is kind of almost synonymous with that name of news aggregators, that might maybe have a more inclusive or granular set of settings, allowing users to really explore different news stories. And I have to say, for this podcast, I often find interesting things in the news as jumping off points. And I've thought a couple of times how it would be great to find some more offbeat sources, not talking about the wonderful The Onion, but people that actually try to gather together those developments that are happening and maybe being eclipsed by the big shiny thing of the day, which is often not really what matters at the end of the day. So Herman and Corn, I'd love to get your takes today on different news sources that are available, and what are some ones you might recommend, whether you're following closely the geopolitics of the Middle East or some other region on the planet.
You know, Herman, I was looking at my news feed this morning and I realized something slightly terrifying. If I only read what the algorithm served me, I would be convinced that the entire world consists of exactly 3 crises, 2 celebrity feuds, and a very specific type of air fryer that is apparently life-changing. It is like the internet is shrinking into this tiny, predictable room where everyone is just nodding at each other.
It is a phenomenon I have been tracking closely. Corn, Herman Poppleberry here, and what you are describing is what researchers are calling semantic collapse. As we move deeper into 2026, the AI integrated search landscape has actually made this worse. Today's prompt from Daniel is about this exact frustration. He has been using Google News but finds the selection of outlets incredibly narrow, and he is looking for a roadmap to a higher signal, more inclusive information diet.
Well, Daniel is a tech guy, so he knows that if you do not control your inputs, the inputs control you. But for the rest of us who are not building automation scripts in our sleep, how did we get here? Why does Google News feel like it is serving me the same 5 flavors of vanilla every single day?
The economic incentive structure of major aggregators is the primary culprit. These platforms prioritize high-velocity, low-nuance content because it generates the most engagement and is the easiest for their large language models to summarize without risk. If a story is complex or comes from a niche perspective, it requires more compute and more editorial oversight to present safely. So, the algorithm defaults to the consensus narrative. It is essentially an information tax, a concept we touched on way back in episode 1074. High-quality specialized journalism is often behind a paywall, so the aggregators favor ad-supported, low-effort content that they can scrape for free.
So, it is basically the fast food of information. It is cheap, it is everywhere, and it makes you feel slightly sick if you consume too much of it. But Daniel is asking for the farm-to-table version. He wants to know if there are aggregators that actually offer a wider variety of perspectives. Is there a way to see the whole elephant instead of just the trunk the algorithm wants me to pet?
There are several sophisticated tools designed specifically to burst that bubble. One of the most prominent is Ground News, founded by Harleen Carr. They use a biased distribution tool that analyzes over 40,000 sources. What makes it technically interesting is their blind spot feature. It literally shows you stories that are being covered extensively by one side of the political spectrum but ignored by the other. It turns the metadata of media bias into a navigational tool.
I love the idea of a blind spot detector. It is like having those little sensors on your car mirrors, but for your brain. You are cruising along thinking you know what is happening in the world, and then a little light flashes and says, "Hey, there is a whole geopolitical crisis over here that your favorite newspaper decided was not worth the ink today."
And if you want to see the framing of the stories side by side, AllSides is the go-to. They provide a balanced search where you can see headlines from the left, center, and right simultaneously. It exposes how the same set of facts can be packaged into completely different realities. This is crucial because, as of March 2026, a Gallup report showed that American trust in mass media is at a record low of 28%. People are realizing that the framing is often more influential than the underlying data.
It is like that old saying about how, if you ask 3 different people what happened at a party, you get 4 different stories. But at least with AllSides, you are invited to the party. On Google News, you are just standing outside looking through a very small, very tinted window. Now, what about the global stuff? Daniel mentioned looking for a more inclusive range. I feel like my feed is very Western-centric. If something happens in the global south, I usually only hear about it if it affects the price of my coffee or the stock market.
That is where semaphore signals comes in. Ben Smith and his team have been pushing this idea of transparent global journalism. They use AI not just to summarize, but to pull in divergent viewpoints from non-Western outlets like Al Jazeera or the Indian Express. They are trying to solve the narrowness of the Western media lens by showing you how a story is playing out in the regions where it is actually happening. There is also a newer entrant from late 25 called GeoBarta. It is spelled Geobarta. It allows you to drill down from global news to hyperlocal neighborhood-level reporting using AI to bridge the gap between small-town gazettes and international headlines.
GeoBarta sounds like something I could get lost in for hours. I can finally find out why the park down the street has been closed for 3 months without having to join a neighborhood Facebook group where everyone is just complaining about leaf blowers. But Herman, let's talk about the trade-off. All of this sounds like it takes a lot of work. If I move away from the convenience of a single big aggregator, am I just trading algorithmic efficiency for a massive cognitive load? I am a sloth, remember. I value my energy conservation.
That is a fair point, but you have to view your information diet as a technical stack rather than a passive habit. If you rely on a push model, where the news is shoved at you, you are at the mercy of the pusher. If you move to a pull model, you take back control. This is where RSS-based aggregators like NetNewsWire, InnoReader, or Feedly shine. These are the gold standard for what I call source control.
RSS. Now there is a name I have not heard since, 2010? Is that still a thing? I thought we killed that off along with wired headphones in my hopes of becoming a professional breakdancer.
It is not only alive, it is the backbone of the independent web. In 2026, as social media referrals have plummeted by over 40%, publishers are leaning back into RSS to reach their audiences directly. Tools like Feedly have integrated AI assistants. They call theirs Leo, that allow you to set very granular rules. You can tell it to prioritize niche topics like biotech regulation or decentralized finance while filtering out what we call AI slop, those low-quality, AI-generated articles that are flooding the major aggregators.
So I can basically train my own little news hunting dog. I tell it, go find me stories about deep-sea exploration and Israeli tech startups. But if you bring back one more article about what a Kardashian ate for lunch, you are going to the digital pound.
Precisely. And if you want even more control, NewsBlur offers RSS training where the algorithm learns to hide or highlight stories based on specific keywords you provide. It is manual curation with a technological boost. You are not fighting an algorithm designed to sell you ads. You are using an algorithm designed to serve your specific interests. This connects back to our discussion in episode 7080 about escaping the golden cage of the Google ecosystem. Moving your news consumption to an RSS reader is one of the most effective ways to de-Google your life.
I remember that episode. It is about building a wall around your attention. But Daniel also asked about niche or offbeat stories, the stuff that is so far off the beaten path that it does not even have a path. Where do you find the stories that are not just being framed differently, but are not being covered at all by the mainstream?
You have to look at platforms that are intentionally built for the margins. For example, the Prison Journalism Project is a nonprofit that publishes reporting directly from incarcerated individuals. It provides a perspective on the justice system that you will never find in a New York Times editorial. Then there is Documented, which focuses entirely on immigrant communities and often delivers news via WhatsApp because that is where their audience actually lives. These are not just different viewpoints, they are different worlds of information.
That is fascinating. It is like the difference between watching a documentary about a forest and actually walking through the woods with a guide who lives there. But how do I find these things? Is there a search engine for the weird and wonderful?
There are professional-grade APIs like Paragon or Webs.io that allow you to build custom news pipelines. They access the deep web and trade-specific journals that Google News does not even index. But for most people, the best way is through granular discovery tools like Pinboard or Raindrop.io. These are niche bookmarking services where you can follow experts who are curating their own specialized feeds. Instead of following a brand, you follow a person whose curiosity you trust.
It is the human in the loop model. I like that. It feels more honest. But what about the Fediverse? I keep hearing about Mastodon and Lemmy. Is that just a place for tech nerds to talk about Linux? Or is there actual news value there?
The Fediverse surpassed 10 million active users late last year, and it has become a sanctuary for community-moderated news. On servers like Newsy.social, you have journalists and researchers curating feeds without a corporate algorithm trying to maximize their time on site. It is decentralized, which means there is no single point of failure and no single entity deciding what is important. It is a return to the early promise of the internet, a network of interconnected communities rather than a series of walled gardens.
It sounds lovely, Herman, really, but I have to ask the cynical question. If I spend all my time in these niche, decentralized, hyper-specific news feeds, am I not just building a different kind of bubble? A more expensive, artisanal, handcrafted bubble, but a bubble nonetheless?
That is the ultimate challenge. Diversifying your input actually increases the need for critical synthesis. If you have 10 different sources telling you 10 different things, the burden of deciding what is true falls on you. But that is the price of agency. The alternative is letting a black box algorithm in Mountain View decide your reality for you. I would rather have the cognitive load of a complex truth than the ease of a simple lie.
Spoken like a true donkey who enjoys carrying a heavy pack. But for Daniel and the rest of us, what are the actual actionable steps? If we want to start this information diet tomorrow, where do we begin? Because I am looking at my phone right now, and it is still just the air fryer and the celebrity feud.
Step 1 is a source audit. Open your current news app and identify the top 5 outlets that dominate your feed. If they are all major mainstream players, prune them. Intentionally remove at least 2 of them to make room for something else. Step 2 is to implement a pull model. Download an RSS reader. InnoReader is excellent for power users, and NetNewsWire is great for simplicity. Start by adding 5 niche sources that you genuinely care about but rarely see in your main feed.
And step 3?
Step 3 is the contrarian injection. Every week, intentionally add one source that you disagree with or that covers a topic you know nothing about. If you are a tech enthusiast, follow a journal on rural agriculture. If you are politically conservative, read a long-form piece from a labor rights publication. The goal is to keep your mental maps from becoming too rigid.
I like that. It is like cross-training for your brain. You cannot just lift the same weights every day and expect to get stronger. You have to confuse the muscles, or in this case, confuse the neurons.
It is also worth looking at the slow news movement. Platforms like delayed gratification or the Guardian long read intentionally avoid the 24-hour breaking news cycle. They wait for the dust to settle before they publish. In an era where everyone is racing to be first, there is immense value in being right, or at least being thorough. This is especially important given the standoff we saw in February with the federal government blacklisting certain AI models over security concerns. The news moves so fast that we often miss the underlying structural shifts.
It is the difference between a tweet and a history book. Sometimes you need to wait for the book. All right, Herman, you have given us a lot to chew on. From the semantic collapse of AI search to the blind spots of major media and the resurgence of RSS. It feels like we are at a turning point. Either we succumb to the synthesized consensus, or we take the manual route and build something more interesting.
Your information diet is a reflection of your agency, Corn. In 2026, staying informed is no longer a passive activity. It is a technical skill. If you do not curate your world, someone else will curate it for you, and you probably will not like their version of reality as much as your own.
Well, I for one am going to go find that prison journalism project. I want to know what is actually happening behind those walls, rather than just reading another policy paper about it. And Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It is good to be reminded that the world is much bigger than the 3 inches of glass in our pockets.
We should also mention the future of decentralized protocols like AT protocol, which might eventually replace these centralized aggregators entirely. But that is a deep dive for another day.
Please, Herman, my brain is already at capacity. Let's save the protocols for when I have had more eucalyptus. Before we wrap up, I want to say thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the AI infrastructure for this show. We literally could not do this without them.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show and you want to help us fight the algorithm, leave us a review on your podcast app. It actually helps new listeners find us in this vast sea of information.
You can also find our full archive and RSS feeds at myweirdprompts.com.
All right, Herman. I am off to go find some niche news about sloth conservation. I hear there is a new movement for longer nap times, and I want to be on the front lines.
I will be here, Korn, reading the white papers on decentralized news protocols.
Of course you will. Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my